You are just a little dirty mistake that your father made before he met a woman of his level. So get out of my sight before I throw you out on the street." Those specific words froze the blood in my veins. The worst part wasn't just that my future daughter-in-law was saying this to a 7-year-old boy. The worst part was that my son, Mark, was standing right there, scrolling through his phone, acting like he didn't hear a thing. I never thought I'd be the type of man to declare war on his own family. But some lines simply cannot be crossed. If you love stories where justice is served cold, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. My name is Thomas. I'm 62 years old, and I've spent my life building a logistics empire from the ground up. I have money, influence, and a nice estate. But my most precious asset isn't my stock portfolio. It's my grandson, Leo. Leo's mother passed away 3 years ago, and since then, he's been the light of my life. My son, Mark, used to be a good father. He was attentive and loving. Then, 6 months ago, he met Tiffany. Tiffany is beautiful, I will give her that. She presents herself as the perfect socialite. However, for months I had a gut feeling that her sweetness was nothing but a mask. She would smile too wide when I mentioned my business assets, and she would frown with genuine disgust whenever Leo wanted to sit between them on the couch. But I didn't have proof. I tried to tell myself I was just being an overprotective grandfather. I was wrong. I was in my study, the door slightly ajar. They didn't know I was home early from the office. I heard Leo ask a simple, innocent question from the hallway. "Tiffany, can I be in the pictures with you and Daddy at the wedding?" That is when the mask fell off. I walked silently to the hallway, staying in the shadows, peering through the crack in the door. I saw her looming over him, pointing a manicured finger in his face. After she called him a mistake, she hissed, "We don't want a reminder of Mark's past ruining my aesthetic." I waited. My heart was pounding in my chest. I waited for Mark to defend his son. I waited for him to yell, to protect his child, to call off the wedding right then and there. Instead, he just sighed, looked up from his screen and said, "Leo, stop bothering Tiffany. She's stressed about the planning. Go to your room." That silence from my son hurt more than any physical blow. I realized right then that the son I raised was gone. I couldn't barge into that room, not yet. The rage was white-hot, but my mind clicked into the cold, analytical state I use to close multi-million-dollar deals. I needed proof, not just for myself, but to understand the full depth of their corruption. I spent the next 2 days as a phantom in my own home, watching. I didn't need hidden cameras. Their cruelty was brazenly played out in plain sight. It wasn't just that Tiffany was a cruel witch. It was how Mark actively supported her erasure of his son. I saw them sitting on the patio, discussing their honeymoon plans, right in front of Leo. Leo, excited, asked if he could see pictures of the resort Mark had mentioned. Tiffany's smile was practiced and venomous. "Oh, honey," she said, without looking at Leo. "That place doesn't allow kids like that. It's an exclusive resort for us." Mark just laughed, confirming her point, not even glancing at his son's fallen face. The final gut punch came when Leo brought up the baseball game Mark had promised him next weekend. Mark immediately looked uncomfortable, but before he could speak, Tiffany cut in with a falsely sweet tone. "Oh, Leo, Daddy is far too busy checking our wedding contracts and tasting cakes. He can't waste time on silly games right now." And Mark just nodded, confirming the lie to his son. That was the moment the anger passed. It was replaced by a chilling realization. Mark wasn't just a victim of Tiffany's manipulation. He was an active participant in neglecting his own blood. He was prioritizing his fiancée's shallow approval and my money over his son's well-being. My son had become a spineless parasite. The wedding wasn't a union. It was a hostile takeover of my family legacy. My course of action became crystal clear. This required precision, patience, and a financial weapon they would never see coming. The observation stage was over. It was time for phase 2, the counter-deception. I had to lull them into a dangerous, false sense of security. I needed them to believe I was old, distracted, and easily manipulated. A tired, fading man who was ready to sign over his life's work to his heir. Tiffany, sensing the finish line was near, became bolder. She started what she called minimizing and refreshing the common areas. The following afternoon, I found Leo sitting in the garage, clutching a single, slightly faded crayon drawing. It was a picture he had drawn of his mother, himself, and Mark. Tiffany had declared the drawing clutter and tossed it into the recycling bin, along with Leo's favorite old stuffed animal, a gift from his mother. Leo rescued the drawing, but the animal was already gone. When I asked Tiffany about the items, she gave me a vacant, almost pitying look. "It was old, Thomas. I'm just minimizing. We need a clean, sophisticated look for the new family." Mark, predictably, sided with her, muttering that Leo was too old for baby things. This wasn't just exclusion. It was a psychological attack meant to erase Leo's connection to his past and his mother. This was the final proof I needed. I started playing the part of the frail patriarch. I would occasionally bring up big, exciting words like trust fund and estate planning in front of them, but always following up with a weak wave of my hand saying, "Oh, but I'm getting too old for this complex stuff. Mark, you and Tiffany will handle it eventually, right?" I'd forget where I put my keys, or misplace important documents. Then let Mark and Tiffany help me find them, making them feel like they were already in control. Tiffany's eyes would glitter every time I played the fool. Her fake kindness ratcheted up, but the contempt in her eyes when she looked at Leo was undeniable. They were so busy counting my millions and planning their extravagant life, they completely missed the predatory, calculating look in my eyes. I wasn't forgetting things. I was setting the perfect, inescapable trap. My show of frailty was working perfectly. Tiffany and Mark were becoming intoxicated by their perceived control. They started talking about the wedding not as a celebration of love, but as an investment, a lavish, tax-free entry point into my financial empire. We had a final planning meeting at the estate. The budget I had approved was already astronomical, but Tiffany suddenly announced a non-negotiable upgrade. She wanted the reception moved from the luxurious hotel ballroom we already booked to a historic landmark venue downtown. The cost was literally double. Her reasoning was purely mercenary. "The current venue isn't exclusive enough, Thomas," she stated, waving her hand dismissively. "It simply doesn't reflect the prestige of the family Mark is about to join." She didn't mention romance or sentimentality. She mentioned prestige and reflection. Mark, completely blinded by her and his own surging ego, just nodded along. Then came the truly ridiculous demand. She insisted that the wedding favors be small, solid silver picture frames, costing over $100 each for 300 guests. I pushed back slightly, playing the confused senior. "Isn't that a bit excessive, dear? We already have such wonderful favors planned." Tiffany leaned in and patted my arm condescendingly, the way you would comfort a simpleton. "Oh, Thomas, don't worry about the cost," she purred. "It's just a drop in the bucket compared to what Mark will be inheriting, right?" She winked at Mark, who smiled smugly, accepting the assumption as fact. That wink, that casual, arrogant dismissal of my immense fortune as their guaranteed future property, was the final straw. It wasn't about the silver frames. It was about Tiffany staking her claim, making sure every guest knew they were marrying into generational wealth. They weren't just wasting my money. They were celebrating their impending financial takeover. I stood up, pretending I felt a dizzy spell, and excused myself. The time for observation and deception was over. It was time for execution. I had a private phone call to make. The morning after the silver frame incident, I drove into the city, not to my company headquarters, but to the discreet top-floor office of David, my estate attorney. David is sharp, ruthless, and has handled my affairs for 30 years. I didn't play the frail, confused man with him. I laid out the ugly truth about Mark and Tiffany in clinical detail. David, I stated, cutting straight to the point, I need to do more than just rewrite a will. A will can be contested. It can drag Leo through years of probate. I need to guarantee my grandson's future is absolutely safe, and I need Mark and Tiffany to receive absolutely nothing. I need a clean, immediate, and irrevocable break. David listened, his shock slowly giving way to professional understanding. You need a scorched earth strategy, Thomas, he finally said. An irrevocable trust. We transfer the ownership of the business, the property, and the majority of your liquid assets into this trust immediately. We name Leo as the sole beneficiary, and you maintain control as the trustee until he's 30. Once the money is in the trust, it's out of your estate. It's legally untouchable, even by Mark. I stressed the urgency. The rehearsal dinner is tomorrow night. The wedding is in 3 days. I need this signed, notarized, and legally binding before the toast. David initially protested the timeline, calling it an impossible legal rush. I looked him straight in the eye. David, make it happen. I don't care what you have to do. This is the most important deal of my life. My grandson's future and the integrity of my legacy depend on the speed of this move. We worked for 12 relentless hours, David's team scrambling to transfer deeds and shares. I left his office that night, not just with a new document, but with a completed financial nuclear weapon. The foundation of Mark and Tiffany's future was gone. They just didn't know the bomb was armed and ready to detonate. The rehearsal dinner felt less like a celebration and more like a gathering of vultures, all circling the promise of my fortune. I arrived with the completed, irrevocable trust papers secured in a lockbox in my car. Knowing the financial bomb was armed gave me a cold, almost unnerving calm. I watched them, savoring their last moments of arrogant certainty. The photographer, hired by Tiffany, started arranging the bridal party for the pre-wedding shoot. Then came the moment for the immediate family portrait. Leo, looking heartbreakingly hopeful in his small suit, tried to step into the frame beside his father. Tiffany stopped the photographer, placing her hand on Leo's shoulder with a sickeningly sweet smile for the few guests nearby. Her eyes, however, were pure ice. "Oh, sweetie," she cooed, loud enough for nearby relatives to hear. "Not you. This is for the new family. Why don't you go find the pastry chef? I'm sure they need help organizing the tiny forks." She physically maneuvered him out of the picture, replacing him with one of her cousins. Mark didn't even flinch. He adjusted his tie and focused on the camera lens, desperate to look like the successful, happy groom. He sacrificed his son for a picture, for his wife's vanity. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from the immense effort of restraint. I felt the blood pounding in my ears, the primal urge to grab Tiffany and expose her right there in front of the overpriced buffet. But I held fast to the plan. I put on my best, feeble smile and played the concerned elder. "Oh, Tiffany is such a perfectionist," I said to a nearby guest, deflecting the awkwardness. Then I leaned down to Leo, who was fighting back tears in the corner. I squeezed his shoulder tightly and whispered, so only he could hear, "Don't worry, champ. Tomorrow, you are going to get the biggest surprise of your life. You are the most important person in this family, and no picture can ever change that." He looked up, confused, but the absolute trust in his wet brown eyes solidified my resolve. The mask held, but the internal tension was almost unbearable. The wedding morning was a spectacle of organized chaos at the downtown hotel suite. I watched Tiffany from a distance. She was a tornado of vanity, barking orders at stylists and assistants, utterly oblivious to the financial sword hanging over her head. She moved through the room with a victorious strut, convinced she had won, convinced her access to my millions was guaranteed. I found Leo sitting quietly in a corner of the dressing room, dressed in his finest suit, but looking small and defeated after the previous night's humiliation. I took him aside, away from the flurry of activity. "Leo," I whispered, holding his shoulders firmly. "I meant what I said. Today is going to change everything for the better, but you have to be strong until Grandpa gives his speech. You need to keep smiling and hold your head high. Can you do that for me, champ?" He nodded, a fragile, determined smile returning. He was ready. Then I sought out Mark. This was his true, final test, his last chance for fatherly advice before I executed the nuclear option. I pulled him close, ensuring we couldn't be overheard. "Son, listen to me closely. You are marrying a woman who openly despises your child. Look at yourself. Before you take those vows, are you really willing to trade your son's happiness, his security, and his self-worth for this extravagance?" Mark didn't flinch. He merely adjusted his cufflink and avoided my gaze. His response was cold and rehearsed. "Dad, don't be so dramatic. Tiffany is high maintenance, sure, but she's worth it. Leo just needs to learn his place in our new family structure. He's a boy. She's my future. Stop trying to sabotage my happiness." His words, my future, my happiness, with no mention of his sons, were the sound of the final nail being hammered into the coffin of our relationship. My last flicker of hope for the man I raised died right there. He had made his choice. I smiled, a chilling, final smile that he mistook for weary acceptance. "All right, son. You're right. I hope you have the future you deserve." I left him, knowing that the lavish future he expected had just been shredded into 1,000 pieces, and he had helped me sharpen the blade. The wedding ceremony itself was a perfect reflection of Tiffany's taste: expensive, beautiful, and utterly hollow. It took place in a cathedral-like ballroom, dripping with rare imported flowers flown in from Ecuador, and crystal chandeliers that must have cost a fortune. Every single opulent detail paid for by the tired old man. I sat in the front row, a silent observer in this spectacular theatrical performance. Tiffany floated down the aisle in a custom-designed gown that probably cost more than my first successful company launch. Mark stood at the altar, looking less like a groom and more like a nervous puppet, waiting for the vows that would officially tether him to Tiffany's financial demands. When they exchanged their promises, I listened intently. Tiffany's voice was smooth and practiced, talking about lifelong devotion and, the phrase slipped in so subtly, building a secure future. It was the most transactional declaration of love I had ever heard. Mark's vows were generic and weak, his eyes darting around the room, unable to meet mine. They kissed, and the whole room erupted in applause, celebrating a lie I was about to expose. I sat there with a stone face, my hand tightly holding Leo's small, warm one. He was quiet, still nervous, but trusting me completely after my promise that morning. Every time the applause swelled, I squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back. He was my anchor, the only real, honest soul in this entire room full of performance. As they signed the registry and walked back down the aisle, officially recognized as husband and wife, the knot was tied. The legal document binding their marriage was finalized, but so was the legal document securing Leo's future. I rose to my feet with the rest of the crowd, but my smile was not one of happiness or relief. It was the smile of a hunter who has cornered his prey. The ceremony was over. The execution would begin at the reception. It was time for the microphone. The ballroom was buzzing with anticipation. Tiffany was beaming, her face a mask of triumphant glee. I was introduced as the father of the groom. The moment of reckoning was here. I tapped the microphone twice. The sound echoed in the massive room, and every eye turned to me. I raised my glass, pausing just long enough for the silence to feel heavy. "To Mark and Tiffany," I began, my voice steady. "You both look spectacular, and Tiffany, this venue truly reflects the prestige you demanded. You see, Mark always talked about starting a new family and making a clean break from the past, and I support that vision completely." I paused again, looking directly at Tiffany, whose triumphant smile suddenly faltered. And a few days ago, I overheard a sentiment that truly crystallized their vision of this future. I heard Mark's future wife tell my 7-year-old grandson that he was a little dirty mistake that his father made, and that he was going to be thrown out. The ballroom went dead silent. Tiffany's face drained of color, going from radiant white to sickly gray. Mark looked physically sick, his eyes wide with fear and betrayal. I waited for Mark, the boy I raised, to stand up for his son. But he didn't. He chose silence. He chose his new aesthetic over his own flesh and blood. Since the new family wants a clean break from the past, I decided to help them achieve total financial separation. I pulled the signed document from the inner pocket of my tuxedo. During my toast, I announced a small change to the family trust fund. As of yesterday, Mark and Tiffany, your shared financial future is 0. Every asset, every share of the company, every cent of liquid wealth that would have been Mark's is now legally and irrevocably owned by the Leo Legacy Trust. My entire estate is now solely dedicated to my grandson. I let the documents drop onto the podium. Your wedding gift is this: you will never touch my money. Tiffany let out a piercing, raw scream that cut through the silence. She snatched a glass of champagne from a waiter's tray, but dropped it before she could throw it. Mark rushed me one last time, his face twisted in desperate horror, yelling something I couldn't hear over the guests' gasps. The entire ballroom exploded into a chaos of whispers, shouting, and crashing china. I simply placed the microphone back on the stand, picked up my grandson, and walked out. Justice was served. The ballroom was a blur of expensive fabric and cheap drama. I didn't spare Mark or Tiffany another glance. I simply held Leo close and navigated the screaming crowd of shock and confusion. Tiffany was sobbing hysterically, a realization of pure financial ruin washing over her perfect makeup. Mark rushed me one last time, screaming about lawyers and betrayal, but my security detail quickly and silently escorted us to the waiting car. As we drove away from the opulent, hollow venue, leaving the chaos and the wedding they paid for behind, Leo squeezed my neck tightly. "Grandpa, what just happened?" he whispered. "Justice, champ," I replied. "Justice." The aftermath was swift and absolute. Tiffany's gold-digger motivation was immediately confirmed. The marriage, built on the shifting sand of my presumed fortune, lasted exactly 3 months after she discovered the impossibility of breaking the Leo trust. She filed for divorce, and the only asset she walked away with was the box of solid silver picture frames she had so meticulously demanded. Mark spiraled. He lost his mind and his job, trying to keep up a lifestyle he could no longer afford. He attempted to contact me repeatedly, begging, pleading poverty, and claiming Tiffany manipulated him. I sent him one final message, a smiling photo of Leo, thriving and safe. He made his choice to abandon his son for a fleeting illusion of wealth, and there was no coming back. Leo is now thriving. He is safe, happy, and knows he is loved unconditionally. I have legally taken him under my full guardianship. My business is flourishing under new secure management structures designed to protect Leo's future. I found the peace and purpose I needed in protecting my blood. Justice was swift, public, and absolutely final. Now, I want to hear from you. Did I do the right thing by financially destroying my son to secure and save my grandson? What would you have done if you heard those words? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge and absolute redemption, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more true stories where the bad guys always get exactly what's coming to them. The end. Thank you for listening.